Hello everyone, this is Chandanni with the platform of my new site that's coming up soon called WeBeFree.com. That's primarily a site that's dedicated to the expression and creativity and participation of visionaries and change makers and artists and visionaries and all people that want to share their creativity and wisdom and participation of what the world entails for them. So I wanted to begin my dialogue today with some news about the riots in London. And as many of you know, I grew up in London. It's my, even though ethnically I'm from Iran, my family's from Iran, I did grow up and was born in London. And so some of my formative years and the first memories I really have in my mind's eye are from my years growing up in London. And I did actually move here when I was around 18, so my formidable years really were spent in England. And to think back on my childhood growing up in London, there were so many different issues and circumstances. I grew up in the 80s, basically the 70s and the 80s, and you know, living in London, growing up during that time was a magical time, but also a time where the IRA, the Irish, were revolting a lot in London. And so during Christmas seasons and holiday seasons, there was always sort of like scares of the IRA bombings and terrorist attacks and stuff like that. And then also, we would have sort of the football hooligans. So every time there was a big football game around, our parents would tell us to stay in and not go on the tube, and so that was sort of a common affair. But nothing quite. And then there were also sort of the newspaper riots in the 80s. Against sort of the oppression of a lot of the union workers in the newspaper industry. But nothing that was as extreme as what's going on right now. And I was actually quite horrified to hear, because I had no idea. I've been traveling for the past few days, and I suppose this all started on Friday, and I started chatting to a friend of mine in London, and they made me aware of the riots that are sort of in pending and continuing right now, and how there were around 6,000 police officers on the streets of London trying to protect the civilians from looters and hooligans, and someone got shot, and I'm not exactly sure the details, but it's sort of in an upheaval. It's an uprising in London, an uprising that is filled with destruction and disorder and looting and people hurting one another in the name of absolute sort of abandon and greed, and sort of quite nonsensical, really. But really, I think that when something like this does happen in a community, and as my friend was telling me, that the people that are doing this are actually quite young, and he was saying a majority of them are anywhere between 18 and 21, and sometimes even younger. And of course there are older people that are participating in the violence and the affairs. But whenever a community or a society or a group of individuals outlashes in this way, it's not just because they're disobedient or destructive members of society. It's an indication of an unease, of an energetic unease that is perpetually emanating within a culture, within a society, within a group. And so for me to be shocked at what's going on in London and feel quite concerned, I also feel very connected, as I do, to most countries and most cultures in our world. I really do see myself as a continual connection of everything in existence. It's just part of my daily affairs, but especially in London, where I have such deep roots and such deep history, and I know the culture so well, that it's almost, to me, inevitable that a day like this or days like this would come where the youth of England, and usually in youth there is a rivalry and a passion and the tendency to move that may not be in older generations, because the youth are still discovering who they are. The youth are still raw and fresh and filled with inquisitiveness and wanting to conquer the world and discover who they are. So to me, it makes sense that whenever you have revolutionaries or even these children in the fundamental Islamic cultures that blow themselves up in the name of God or country are quite young as 14 to 16 years old, and to look at children and to look at the youth of our world is to look at where we're coming from, is to look at the energy of what is orchestrating our culture. So what's happening in London is a symptom of the youth of our humanity. Who are we? What are we doing to each other? How are we raising our children? What are we sharing? What are we connecting with each other? How are we connecting with each other? Why must it be a world where we can't express ourselves? So what happens is that something happens in a town, in a city, where the youth, where people, where individuals feel like they can just lash out their anger, their terror, in the name of greed, in the name of frustration, in the name of equality or inequality. How is it that that can happen? How is it that we would feel so unfulfilled and so lost and so angry that it would take an event like that to make us realize that what we're doing perhaps is not the best thing for us? Because I can guarantee you, at the end of the day, if any of those individuals are sleeping in their beds at night, even if they wouldn't admit it to each other, they know in their hearts that that wasn't the best thing to do. But we live in a world where there is poverty and need and inequality and injustice and not a place where we can express ourselves or feel accepted or wanted. So these are just questions and ideas that torch a fire, a flame in my heart in a positive way, because I think that these things bring us together. Even though it seems as though it's falling apart, I feel that the youth of London, the community of London, is going through an awakening, a transformation of perhaps great and deep healing, great and deep necessity to become aware of things that perhaps have been avoided for a very, very long time. This is Chandanni with WeDharma.com, and now with WeBeFree.com. Be yourself, share yourself. Together we are stronger, and I look forward to continuing this dialogue as we move and change and grow in our world. Speak soon.